"Ma'am, unless you're buying something, please don't touch the display." He said it with a smirk, the kind that tastes like condescension. But what he didn't know was that the woman he was talking down to owned everything around him. Becka Davis didn't break. She waited, watched, and when the truth came out, it didn't just shatter his pride. It shattered the illusion that power looks a certain way. Stay with us, because what begins in arrogance ends in accountability. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below. Have you ever been dismissed, only to let the truth speak louder than you ever could? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. The scent of polished wood and bergamot filled the Aurora flagship store, that curated kind of luxury that whispered instead of shouted. Becka Davis stood near a display of silk scarves, her tailored trench coat still damp from the drizzle outside. She had come straight from a breakfast meeting that had run long, the kind of meeting filled with men twice her age who still couldn't say "yes, ma'am" without making it sound like an apology. She hadn't planned to stop here, but something had tugged at her. A display placement that felt off in the last sales report, a customer review that mentioned long wait times. For Becka, leadership wasn't about boardrooms. It was about floors like this, where the real pulse of the company lived. She blended in easily, dressed simply, dark jeans, white blouse, gold hoops that caught the light when she moved. Most customers never imagined that the woman next to them might own the brand name stitched into their shopping bags. She liked it that way. It kept people honest. Jaylen Moore was pacing near the registers, tablet in hand, voice sharp as the click of his shoes on marble. He was handsome in the way ambition often is. Precise haircut, expensive cologne, posture that suggested every move was a strategy. He'd been at Aurora only 2 months, already known for his relentless drive and the subtle air of superiority that followed it. Details build empires, he liked to tell his staff, though his tone made it sound like a warning more than wisdom. From across the floor, Becka watched him reprimand a sales associate, his voice low but hard enough to sting. "You think presentation doesn't matter?" he said, straightening a row of perfume bottles by exact millimeters. "If I see one more shelf like this, you'll be back to folding clearance items." The young woman mumbled an apology. Becca's jaw tightened. She recognized the tone, leadership confused with intimidation. She stepped forward, running her hand along a display. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Could someone help me find the limited collection from the Paris showcase?" Jaylen turned. His eyes made a quick scan. Jeans, no jewelry except a watch, no designer handbag, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, the showcase pieces are by appointment only," he said. "Those are high-end exclusives." "I'm aware," Becka replied, her voice calm. "I'd just like to see how they're being presented." He chuckled lightly, as if humoring her. "Look, we have a curated collection on display for regular customers. The Paris line is reserved for clients who actually—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air. "Clients who actually matter." Becka tilted her head. "And if someone wanted to see them without an appointment?" "They'd schedule one," Jaylen said briskly, already turning away. "I'm sure you understand how exclusivity works." She watched him for a long moment, her silence heavy enough to make the nearby associate shift uneasily. Jaylen didn't notice. He was already tapping on his tablet again, issuing orders. Becka smiled faintly, not amusement, but clarity. "Thank you, Mr. Moore," she said. He froze. "You know my name?" "Oh yes," she said softly. "I make it a point to know all my regional managers." The words landed slow, deliberate, like the first crack in glass before it shatters. Jaylen blinked, confusion flickering to alarm as realization dawned. Becca's calm never broke. She adjusted her sleeve, glanced once more around the store, and added, "I came to see how the culture feels on the floor. I've seen enough." Then she walked toward the exit, leaving Jaylen rooted where he stood, heart pounding, pride collapsing, and the whole store suddenly aware that the woman he'd just dismissed owned everything around him. The store's atmosphere shifted the moment Becka returned to the counter. A quiet hum of unease moved through the air, like everyone could sense the collision coming. Jaylen stood at the register, his voice cutting through the delicate background music as he scolded a young sales associate, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20. "I asked for the shipment log, Mia, not excuses. The Paris line inventory isn't a suggestion, it's a system. Do you understand that?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the sting of someone who needed everyone to know who was in control. Becka waited, hands resting lightly on the counter, expression unreadable. When Jaylen finally paused to take a breath, she spoke with quiet patience. "Excuse me. Could someone assist me with a product inquiry?" Jaylen turned toward her slowly, irritation already simmering. "Ma'am, I'm in the middle of correcting an employee. You'll have to wait." The word, "ma'am," slipped from his mouth like an insult dressed in courtesy. Becka didn't move. "I have been waiting," she said evenly. Jaylen sighed, tapping the counter twice. "Fine. What is it you're looking for?" "The new Paris collection I asked earlier." His jaw flexed. "Like I said before, those are by appointment only." "I understand," she replied, "but I'd still like to see how they're displayed." "Ma'am," he said again, louder this time, "you can't just walk in and make demands because you saw something online. We have a brand to protect." His words carried across the room, sharp enough that customers browsing nearby began pretending to examine items they weren't really looking at. Becca's gaze stayed fixed on him, calm, steady, disconcertingly so. "I see," she said quietly. "And who should I speak to if I have a concern about how your staff handles customers?" Jaylen smirked, straightening his tie like a man delivering the final blow. "You're speaking to him. I'm the regional manager." A murmur rippled through the employees behind him. Mia's eyes darted toward Becka, then away again. She recognized her. Most of them did. Jaylen didn't. Becca's head tilted slightly. "Is that so?" "It is," he said, leaning forward just enough to make it condescending. "And since I'm the one in charge, let me save you some time. You're not getting a private viewing of the Paris line. We don't cater to window shoppers." The last phrase landed like a slap. A few feet away, a young man at the fragrance display discreetly pulled out his phone, angling it toward them. Something in the air told him this was worth recording. Becka didn't respond right away. Her silence unnerved him more than if she'd raised her voice. Her eyes, steady, assessing, unblinking, made him shift in place. "Noted," she said finally, her tone low enough that he had to lean in to catch it. "You've made your position clear." Jaylen mistook her composure for surrender. "Good," he said briskly. "Next time, make an appointment before taking up valuable time." Becka straightened, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for your advice, Mr. Moore." The quiet emphasis on his name landed like a slow turn of a key in a lock. Jaylen frowned, a flicker of unease crossing his features, but she was already stepping back, glancing once around the room. Her eyes lingered on Mia, offering a single, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance, then returned to Jaylen. "I'll make sure this visit is noted in your file," she said softly. Before he could reply, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels echoing through the store like punctuation. Behind her, whispers rose, employees trading wide-eyed glances, the bystander's phone still recording as Jaylen stood frozen, realizing far too late that the woman he'd just humiliated wasn't a customer at all. She was the one who signed his paychecks. The store was quieter than a church after Becka left. Conversations that had hummed faintly moments earlier died in the wake of her departure. Jaylen tried to collect himself, straightening displays that didn't need straightening, pretending the room hadn't just watched him unravel. His pulse pounded so loudly in his ears that he barely heard the glass doors slide open again. A tall man in a navy suit strode in, flanked by two members of the corporate operations team. His badge read, Regional Director, Marcus Ellison. The staff stiffened immediately. Marcus never showed up unannounced, not unless something was seriously wrong. He moved past the register without a word, his face pale, his phone still in his hand. "Where is she?" he asked, voice clipped. Jaylen blinked. "Who?" "Becka Davis." The name landed like a hammer. Every employee within earshot froze. Mia's breath hitched audibly. Jaylen laughed once, the sound brittle. "You mean the customer who just left?" She said her name was... Marcus turned on him sharply. "You mean the CEO who just left," he corrected. "She's the reason any of us have jobs, Mr. Moore. And from what I saw on the security feed, you might not for much longer." For a heartbeat, Jaylen couldn't process it. The room seemed to tilt, the air too thin to breathe. What?" he managed, his voice cracking. Marcus didn't bother answering. He turned to the nearest associate. "Was anyone filming?" The young man near the fragrance display raised his hand timidly. Yes, sir, it's already online. People are saying..." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, the kind of blink that meant damage control mode. He sighed, then fixed Jaylen with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. "You publicly berated your own CEO in front of staff and customers, and it's gone viral. Do you have any idea what kind of crisis this is?" Jaylen's mouth opened, but no words came. His brain scrambled for explanations. He didn't know. He hadn't meant it. She didn't look like the owner. But every excuse sounded pathetic even inside his head. The blood drained from his face. Around him, employees avoided eye contact. Becka reappeared at the entrance, as if summoned by the tension itself. Her return silenced even the faint hum of the air conditioning. She walked with unhurried grace, every step measured, the kind of composure that only comes from knowing the ground belongs to you. Her curls glistened faintly under the recessed lights, rain still catching the edges of her coat. "Miss Davis," Marcus began quickly, moving toward her. "We're so sorry." She raised a hand. "Not here, Marcus." Her tone was calm but left no room for argument. Her eyes found Jaylen's, and he wished she'd looked angry. Rage, at least, he could understand. But her face was still, controlled. The kind of quiet that dismantled men faster than shouting ever could. "Mr. Moore," she said softly, and every syllable hit with surgical precision. "In the span of 10 minutes, you've managed to turn a customer experience into a public spectacle and expose exactly what's wrong with the culture we're trying to rebuild." He swallowed hard. "Ms. Davis, I didn't..." "You did," she interrupted gently. "And I let you, because I wanted to see who you were when you thought no one important was watching." The words stripped him bare. His practiced posture collapsed, his hands trembling at his sides. Becka took one step closer, her voice dropping to something almost compassionate. "I own this company," she said simply. The words were soft, but they echoed through the store like thunder. No one breathed. No one moved. Then, with the poise of a woman who didn't need to prove her power, she turned to Marcus. "You'll handle his termination?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Becka looked back at Jaylen one last time, her gaze steady, almost sad. "You'll hear from HR before the end of the day." And just like that, She left again. Graceful, devastating, unforgettable. The glass doors slid shut behind her, and the silence that followed was absolute, filled only by the sound of Jaylen's pride collapsing in real time. By nightfall, the video was everywhere. It started on a shopper's Instagram story, just a 20-second clip captioned, "When arrogance meets karma." Within an hour, it hit TikTok, then X, then every platform that feasted on public downfall. Millions watched as Jaylen Moore raised his voice at a woman who never once raised hers. The audio caught her calm, devastating final words and froze on the moment realization hit his face. Someone slowed it down. Someone added dramatic music. Someone else made a meme. He tried to humble her, but she owned the building. By midnight, Jaylen's name trended alongside hashtag Aurora CEO and hashtag Grace Under Fire. Comment sections exploded, some gleeful, some furious, all unanimous in their judgment. That's what humility looks like. She didn't even need to yell. Power handled with grace. The internet crowned Becka a queen of quiet authority, while Jaylen became the week's cautionary tale. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications, missed calls, messages that started as curiosity and spiraled into cruelty. Hope that ego keeps you warm. How's it feel being fired by a woman you disrespected? Another one bites the dust. He turned off comments, then reopened them minutes later, unable to look away from the digital wreckage of his own making. Even his LinkedIn profile filled with derision. Recruiters who'd once called him ambitious now ghosted him. Friends from business school deleted their supportive posts. Jaylen sat in the dark of his apartment, the only light coming from the screen replaying the moment again and again, his voice sharp and impatient, her voice steady and surgical, the look on his face when the truth hit him. Captured forever. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that exact second of collapse. He'd built his identity on competence and control, and now he was the internet's favorite example of both imploding in public. By morning, reporters camped outside the Aurora headquarters. They wanted quotes, reactions, a statement from the woman who had dismantled a man's arrogance with a single sentence. Becka declined them all. She walked into her office through the side entrance, greeted her assistant with a nod, and said only, "Let it pass." When a journalist managed to shout, "Ms. Davis, any comment on the viral video?" She smiled faintly. None needed. Her silence became the statement. It was restraint mistaken for mystery, grace mistaken for strategy. Every outlet framed her as the embodiment of composure in an age of outrage. Editorials praised her leadership. Talk shows dissected her expression like it was philosophy. But Becka didn't watch any of it. She spent the evening reviewing supplier reports, answering emails, and ordering her communications team not to engage. "The story isn't about him," she said simply. "It's about what we stand for." Meanwhile, Jaylen couldn't leave his apartment without hearing whispers. At coffee shops, screens flashed his face mid-argument. At the gym, someone muttered, "That's him." His phone rang again, his mother, voice tight with disappointment. "Jaylen, what have you done?" He had no answer. The clip that destroyed him was only 37 seconds long. 37 seconds that erased years of effort, reputation, and pride. But what unsettled him most wasn't the public's mockery. It was Becka's silence. No retaliation, no gloating, not even acknowledgement. Just stillness. And in that stillness, he saw the difference between them. She didn't need to defend herself. He was already doing the work for her. Days turned into weeks, and Jaylen's world kept shrinking. What began as a single bad moment had metastasized into something unshakable. His company email was deactivated by the next morning. HR sent an impersonal termination notice, and the severance package he'd once bragged about was under review pending conduct investigation. By the end of the week, his keycard didn't work. His contacts stopped returning calls, and his name had quietly vanished from Aurora's internal directory, as if he'd never existed. At first, he tried to fight back. He wrote long posts online about misunderstanding, context, the pressures of leadership. "I didn't know who she was," he insisted. But the internet didn't care. They had their story, and it was cleaner without nuance. Commenters tore him apart. "You didn't need to know her title to treat her with respect." That's the point, genius. The more he defended himself, the deeper he sank. Within days, his apology video, stiff, rehearsed, filmed in terrible lighting, became its own meme. The people who'd once congratulated him on every career move fell silent. Group chats that used to buzz with inside jokes went eerily quiet. His mentor from business school didn't answer his messages. "It's just bad optics right now," one former colleague finally admitted over text. "Maybe give it a few years." A few years felt like a sentence he couldn't serve. His savings dwindled under rent and credit card bills. Recruiters rejected him with generic responses. Every interview that seemed promising evaporated after a quick Google search. The same algorithms that had once elevated him now sealed every door shut. Eventually, the eviction notice came, not with cruelty, just the indifferent efficiency of consequence. Jaylen moved into a small studio across town, a one-room apartment that smelled faintly of old paint and rain-soaked concrete. He sold his suits first, then his watch, then the leather briefcase he'd once thought made him look like a man with purpose. Pride eroded in layers. He told himself it was temporary, that something would come along. It didn't. The delivery job came out of necessity, not choice. Signing up was easy. The humiliation came later, when he realized his first route took him past an Aurora boutique. He kept his cap pulled low, hoping no one would recognize him, but he felt the ghost of that moment every time he saw the logo gleaming above a storefront. The irony was cruel. He was still delivering, just not the kind of success he'd promised himself. He spent long hours alone in his car, driving through the same streets where his career had once felt limitless. He began to measure his life by the glow of navigation screens and the smell of takeout bags. Sometimes, in the silence between deliveries, he replayed the moment. Her calm face, the quiet authority in her voice, the way she hadn't needed to humiliate him to destroy him. He realized she hadn't wanted to. Weeks blurred into months. The sting of mockery faded into something worse, irrelevance. He became a man invisible to everyone except the people who handed him receipts. One late afternoon, the app pinged with a new delivery. Corporate address, downtown, Aurora Group headquarters. His fingers froze over the steering wheel. He considered declining it. Pride told him to, but rent didn't. After a long pause, he accepted. The GPS blinked its blue line forward, leading him toward the glass tower that used to feel like proof of who he was. Now it was just another stop on his route, until he realized she might be there. The lobby of the Aurora headquarters gleamed with quiet opulence, polished marble floors, cascading light from a glass atrium, the soft hum of success in every corner. Jaylen stepped inside, holding a small box sealed with the company's insignia, his delivery bag slung over one shoulder. He had walked into dozens of buildings since starting this job, but none felt like this one. The air here remembered him, or at least he imagined it did. Every step echoed with a memory of who he used to be. He kept his cap low, praying for anonymity. Maybe he'd just drop the package at the front desk and leave before anyone looked too closely. But fate apparently had other plans. Becka Davis emerged from one of the glass elevators, flanked by two assistants. She was in slate-gray trousers and a cream silk blouse, her hair in soft curls that framed a face too composed to betray surprise, except for the brief flicker of recognition that passed through her eyes. Jaylen froze mid-step. The box suddenly weighed more than it should have. Their eyes met. Shock. Then the silence that follows when time collapses into a single, unbearable moment. The receptionist hesitated, sensing the tension, but Becka approached calmly, her heels clicking against the marble. "You can hand it to me," she said to him, her voice even. "It's for my office." Jaylen swallowed hard and extended the box. His hands trembled just enough for the clipboard to rattle when she signed for it. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moore," she said, looking up at him with polite warmth. Not anger, not pity, just simple acknowledgement. It disarmed him completely. He hadn't expected her to even remember his name, let alone use it with that kind of grace. For a moment he forgot to breathe. "Ms. Davis, She raised her hand gently, not in dismissal but in mercy. "You don't owe me words," she said softly. "Just growth." Her tone wasn't cold. It wasn't forgiving either. It was something higher. Truth, without cruelty. Then she turned, thanked the receptionist, and walked toward the elevators again, her assistants following silently. The doors slid shut, and Jaylen stood there long after she was gone, still holding the pen she'd used. The receptionist cleared her throat. "You okay, sir?" Jaylen nodded slowly, unable to find a single word. "Yeah," he whispered. Yeah." He left the building quickly, the weight of that single sentence pressing heavier than the box he'd carried. Outside, the city noise hit him. Traffic, footsteps, life continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had. He leaned against his car, replaying her voice in his head. "You don't owe me words, just growth." He'd spent months drowning in regret, searching for the right apology, the right justification, the right way to undo a moment that had already defined him. But Becca's simplicity left him stripped bare. She didn't want his explanations. She wanted him to evolve, or at least to try. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every attempt at rest turned into flashes of her face, steady, centered, untouchable. He realized that she hadn't humiliated him that day in the store. He had humiliated himself, and now, standing in the shadow of the empire she rebuilt, he saw her for what she truly was, a woman who didn't just own a company, she owned herself. For the first time since his fall, Jaylen felt something like clarity. Not hope yet, not forgiveness. Just the faint understanding that redemption wasn't something you begged for. It was something you earned when no one was watching. The days after that second encounter blurred together, but her words refused to fade. "You don't owe me words, just growth." They replayed in Jaylen's head while he drove, while he ate, even while he slept. They had the weight of something more than a reprimand, almost a commandment. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't argue his way out of it. He stopped trying to craft redemption through speeches. Instead, he started showing up. There was a small community center 5 blocks from his apartment, paint peeling, sign half broken. He'd passed it 100 times without looking twice. The first morning he walked in, it smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver braids looked up from the reception desk. "You here for something?" "I'm here to help," Jaylen said, surprising himself with how small his voice sounded. They didn't ask many questions. They needed hands, not resumes. His first task was stacking food boxes for families who'd signed up for the weekend distribution program. It was repetitive, physical work, no strategy, no spotlight, just weight and effort. He found a strange calm in it, in being useful without being seen. The regular volunteers came from every kind of struggle, single mothers, retirees, teenagers doing court-ordered service. They didn't care who he'd been. They just wanted him to pull his weight. A young man named Theo, maybe 20, noticed how awkwardly Jaylen handled the crates. "You move like you're afraid to get dirty," Theo joked, grinning. Jaylen smiled back, embarrassed. "I guess I'm learning." And he was. Slowly. Humility, it turned out, was not a mindset. It was a practice. Listening instead of correcting, helping without taking credit, showing up on time because someone else depended on it. Each small act was its own kind of penance. On breaks, Jaylen sat with the others, sipping bad coffee and hearing their stories. People who'd lost jobs, homes, loved ones, but somehow hadn't lost their will to keep giving. He stopped seeing them as broken and started seeing them as whole in ways he'd never been. It was there he first heard Becka's name again, not as a CEO, but as a benefactor. The center director, a woman named Lorna, mentioned her casually. "Miss Davis helped us keep this place open after the funding cuts. Paid our rent for 6 months straight. Never even wanted a plaque." Jaylen froze. "She donated anonymously?" Lorna nodded. "Said her mother used to volunteer here before she passed. Told me she was just paying forward what she'd once been given." Her mother. Becka had spoken of loss once in an old interview Jaylen vaguely remembered skimming. A single line about starting from bankruptcy after her mother's death. He hadn't thought about it then. He was too busy looking for ways to sound impressive. But now, standing where she had once given quietly, he understood something vital. Her strength wasn't inherited. It was earned in the spaces where no one clapped. Weeks passed, and volunteering became his rhythm. He began arriving early, staying late, cleaning up after everyone left. He started mentoring some of the kids who hung around after school, helping them fill out job applications or college essays, not because it made him feel redeemed, but because it made him feel human again. One evening, as he wiped down tables, Lorna said, "You've got good energy, Jaylen." "People notice." He smiled faintly. "I used to want people to notice for the wrong reasons. Maybe now it's for the right ones." When he left that night, the air was cool, the city humming softly around him. For the first time since losing everything, Jaylen didn't feel haunted by Becka's silence. He felt guided by it. Growth, he realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about earning the right to live differently in its shadow. It began by accident. One evening, after closing up at the community center, Jaylen scrolled through his phone to unwind. The algorithm, in its strange omniscience, suggested a video titled, "Leading with Integrity, Becka Davis at the Global Leadership Summit." For a long moment, he just stared at the thumbnail. Her poised behind a podium, the Aurora logo behind her like a crown she'd never asked for. He almost swiped past, but something in him couldn't. He tapped play. Her voice filled the small apartment, smooth and deliberate, the kind of voice that didn't demand attention. It earned it. "True leadership," she was saying, "doesn't make people feel small so you can feel big. It creates space for others to rise." Jaylen sat frozen. Every word landed like a mirror held up to who he'd once been. She wasn't talking about him, not directly. She probably hadn't thought of him in months. And yet, as she spoke about accountability and empathy, he felt as though she were standing in front of him again, saying everything he'd needed to hear but hadn't been ready for. He started watching more of her talks. Not all at once, but when he needed direction, like a compass he could return to. In interviews, she talked about rebuilding after loss, about growing from mistakes that weren't always public but still mattered. She mentioned her mother's passing, the bankruptcy that followed, the years of silence before Aurora rose again. "Resilience," she said once, "isn't a skill. It's a decision you keep making every morning when no one's applauding." He replayed that line more times than he'd ever admit. It was everything he'd never understood while chasing titles and admiration. For Becka, Success had never been about image. It was about impact. And somewhere between her words and his memories, he realized that was what made her extraordinary. Not her power, but her peace. He began taking notes, not of her achievements, but of her principles. Listen before leading. Leave people better than you found them. Humility isn't weakness, it's mastery of self. They became quiet promises he tried to live by each day at the center. When he spoke to the young volunteers, he echoed her teachings without meaning to. When he caught himself judging others, he thought of her stillness that day in the store, the way she'd looked at him, not with anger, but with disappointment deep enough to force change. One evening, during a Q&A at a university, she was asked about forgiveness. Jaylen watched from his couch, surrounded by the faint hum of the city through his window. "Forgiveness," she said, "isn't something you grant for others to see. It's something you do so you can walk lighter." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Sometimes the most merciful thing you can give someone is your absence." The sentence hit harder than any headline or rumor ever had. It wasn't bitterness. It was release. He realized then that she'd already let him go. She wasn't holding anger. She wasn't even thinking about him. Her peace had never depended on his apology. She'd moved forward while he was still trying to rewrite the past. That understanding hurt more than any punishment could, because it meant there was no redemption to earn from her, only from himself. He closed the video, sat in silence for a long time, and finally whispered, "Thank you." Not because she could hear him, but because he needed to say it. To mark the moment he stopped seeking forgiveness and started living like he finally understood what it meant. Months passed, each one softening the edges of the man Jaylen used to be. His world had become smaller but cleaner. Mornings at the community center, evenings mentoring teenagers who reminded him of his younger self. The version still hungry, but not yet hardened. He'd learned to live without noise, without validation, without the illusion that success had to be seen to matter. So when he saw the announcement about the Aurora initiative scrolling across his feed one night, something inside him stirred, part fear, part hope. The post read, "Mentorship Program for Underrepresented Entrepreneurs, Building Tomorrow's Leaders Through Access, Integrity, and Innovation." Becka Davis's name was at the bottom, her signature sharp and steady. Jaylen hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. He knew how it would look. Applying to her company again, even from the outside, even anonymously, it felt audacious, maybe foolish. But this time wasn't about proximity to power. It was about purpose. He spent the next 3 nights drafting his proposal. It wasn't polished in the corporate way it used to be, but it was honest. His idea was simple, a youth program teaching business fundamentals through community mentorship. No lofty promises, no jargon, just a bridge between potential and opportunity. He wrote about second chances, though he never used those words directly. "The best leaders," one line read, "are those who've learned to listen after being humbled." When he finished, he signed it J. Moore and hit submit. 2 weeks later, in a corner office overlooking the city, Becka Davis sifted through a stack of applications. Her afternoons were quieter now. No interviews, no sound bites, just work that mattered. The mentorship program had been her mother's dream before it became hers, a way to open doors for people who never got invited into the room. Most applications read like marketing pitches, impressive, calculated, forgettable, but one caught her attention. It was structured with precision, but written with heart. The author didn't posture, he confessed. He wrote about failure as a teacher, not a stain, about leadership as service, not control. Becca's brow furrowed slightly. There was something familiar in the rhythm of the sentences, the clipped phrasing softened by humility. When she reached the line about learning to listen after being humbled, something in her chest tightened. She didn't need to see the name. She knew. For a long moment she sat back, the city stretching endlessly beneath her. Old memories flickered like distant lights, his arrogance, her silence, that day in the store when pride had met its reckoning, and then she exhaled, slowly, deliberately. The proposal wasn't perfect, but it was good, earnest, useful. It didn't ask for sympathy, and that was precisely why it deserved consideration. She could have rejected it easily, citing conflict of interest. Instead, she made a note in the margin, strong potential, let it stand on merit, and slid it into the accepted pile. When the approval email arrived the next week, Jaylen read it twice to be sure. His heart didn't race like it once would have. There was no triumphant soundtrack in his mind, just quiet gratitude and disbelief that the same company he'd once disgraced had opened a door for him, not because of who he'd been, but because of who he was becoming. He sat back in his chair, a small smile forming. He didn't know if Becka had seen his name or recognized his words, but somehow, that didn't matter. What mattered was that the work itself was worthy, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was too. The first mentorship meeting took place in Aurora's Innovation Hall, a sleek space filled with natural light and quiet anticipation. The participants gathered in small circles, clutching notebooks and coffee cups, a mix of nerves and ambition buzzing in the air. Jaylen stood near the back, trying to blend into the group, though part of him knew anonymity was fragile. He hadn't slept the night before. The idea of being in her presence again, this time not as a subordinate, not as an outsider, but as something in between, felt surreal. He kept reminding himself this wasn't about her. This was about the work, about showing up for something bigger than his regret. The program coordinator welcomed everyone, outlining the goals, the structure, the intention behind Aurora's investment in people rather than products. Then the doors opened and Becka entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Her presence carried the same gravity it always had, graceful, assured, effortlessly commanding without effort. She wore a navy blazer over soft gray, her hair pinned neatly at the back of her neck. There was no grand introduction. She didn't need one. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice clear but warm. "You're not here to impress anyone. You're here to build something that lasts." As she moved through the room, greeting each participant individually, Jaylen rehearsed what he might say. "Thank you for accepting me. I'm sorry. I've changed." Every version sounded wrong, self-centered, like dragging her back into something she'd already released. He decided maybe silence would be better, but when she finally reached him, standing just an arm's length away, the words came on their own. "Miss Davis." She looked up, and for a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes softened slightly, acknowledging recognition without surprise. "Mr. Moore," she said evenly. "Welcome." He swallowed, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, the room fading around them. "But thank you for the chance to do something right." For a moment, she just studied him. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just full, like the pause before truth lands. Then she nodded once. "Then do it right. No lecture, no correction. Just that simple directive, an invitation without promise." She turned to the next participant, the conversation seamlessly continuing, but the air around him felt different. Jaylen stood there, heart steadying, realizing that this was it. There would be no cinematic closure, no emotional apology scene, no redemption speech. She wasn't giving him absolution. She was giving him responsibility. And that somehow meant more. Throughout the day, Becka watched him from a distance. He listened more than he spoke, deferred credit, encouraged others. There was a stillness about him that hadn't existed before, the kind that comes from a man who's been broken and rebuilt with his own hands. When the session ended, Becka lingered near the door as participants filtered out. Jaylen passed her on the way out, offering a small, respectful nod. She returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, sunlight spilled across the pavement. Jaylen walked toward his car feeling lighter, not redeemed, not cleansed, but grounded. He understood now that growth didn't erase the past. It only gave it context. And standing there in the glow of everything he'd lost and everything he was still learning to rebuild, he realized that maybe that was enough. The mentorship program unfolded quietly, the way real transformation does, without fanfare, without headlines. Jaylen arrived early each morning, staying late after sessions ended, his energy steady and unforced. At first, the younger participants viewed him with suspicion. He didn't have the polished charm of their other mentors or the practiced confidence of executives who dropped in for photo opportunities. He was quieter, more measured, but also more real. He didn't talk about success, he talked about mistakes. He didn't offer shortcuts, he offered presence. Over time, they started gravitating toward him. The teens he worked with were raw ambition wrapped in impatience, just like he had been. One boy named Marcus reminded him painfully of himself at 20, sharp, defensive, certain he already knew everything. Jaylen saw the familiar arrogance in him, the kind that masks fear. "You can be right," Jaylen told him one afternoon, "or you can be effective. Most days, you can't be both." Marcus had rolled his eyes, but the next week he showed up early, asking for more feedback. Mentorship wasn't about teaching them to win, it was about teaching them to endure. Jaylen realized that somewhere between the delivery routes and the humility of service, he'd stopped needing to prove anything. He found joy in small victories, a student getting into college, a business plan coming together, a shy voice speaking up for the first time. These weren't trophies he could hang on a wall, but they felt truer than any promotion he'd ever chased. Becka watched from afar. She made it a point to attend sessions when she could, always quietly, always without drawing attention. She noticed things, the way Jaylen spoke to the students as equals, the way he listened with intent, the way he never brought up his own fall from grace. There was no performance, no need to curate redemption. He was simply doing the work. One afternoon, as the cohort presented their final projects, Becka stood in the back of the room, arms folded loosely. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Jaylen guided his group to the front, not taking center stage but standing just behind them, letting them speak for themselves. Their pitch wasn't perfect, but it was passionate and genuine. When they finished, the room erupted into applause. Jaylen didn't smile for himself. He smiled for them. Becka felt something soften inside her. Pride, perhaps, but not for him alone, for what he represented. Proof that people could break and rebuild without spectacle, that humility could thrive in the same space where arrogance once lived. She thought of how easy it would have been to use his story publicly, to frame it as a corporate lesson in accountability. But she never would. Redemption wasn't something you broadcast. It was something you protected, fragile and private, like faith. After the presentations, she crossed paths with him in the hallway. He was gathering folders, sleeves rolled up, the lines around his eyes deeper but gentler. "You did well," she said. "They did well," he corrected, smiling faintly. Becka nodded. "That's what I meant." There was no need for further conversation. They both understood. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer dictated the terms of who they were. He had learned to rebuild quietly, and she had learned to let him. Later that night, Jaylen walked home through the city, the hum of streetlights above him. For the first time, he saw his reflection in a shop window and didn't flinch. He wasn't the man from the video anymore, or the man trying to escape it. He was something simpler, steadier, proof that the mirror of redemption doesn't erase what it reflects. It only softens the edges until you can finally stand to look again. The ballroom at the Aurora Leadership Summit shimmered beneath a sea of gold light, the kind reserved for moments meant to be remembered. Executives, entrepreneurs, and community leaders filled the rows, their murmurs blending into a low hum of anticipation. Jaylen sat near the middle, not at the head tables or anywhere special, just another attendee in a tailored suit that had seen better days, his badge clipped simply with his name. J. Moore, Mentor, Aurora Initiative. No title, no decoration, just work. He'd earned the seat through quiet effort, not invitation. When the notice for the summit came through the mentorship network, he hesitated to register. A year ago, the thought of being in the same room as Becka Davis would have sent him spiraling into shame. But time, reflection, and the relentless steadiness of doing good work had reshaped the fear into respect. He wasn't there to prove anything anymore. He just wanted to listen. The lights dimmed. A hush rolled through the hall as Becka walked onto the stage. She didn't rush. She never did. Dressed in ivory and gray, she carried the same calm gravity she always had, though now there was something softer about her. A peace earned, not given. When she began to speak, her voice reached every corner of the room, low and assured. "We talk often about success," she said, "about vision, about innovation. But we rarely talk about what happens when we fail, and we will fail, every single one of us. The question isn't whether we fall, but who we become after we do." Jaylen leaned forward, listening as if her words were air itself. Around him, people nodded, scribbling notes, unaware that the man sitting among them had once been her public lesson in humility. "True power," she continued, "isn't in how we rise. It's in how we rise after we've fallen, because grace without accountability is weakness, and accountability without grace is cruelty. The balance between the two, that's leadership." The room absorbed her words in reverent silence. Becka paused, letting them land. She didn't reference the viral video, the scandal, or any part of her history with him. She didn't need to. The truth of her philosophy was carved from experience, and Jaylen recognized himself somewhere inside it, not as the villain or the victim, but as the lesson. When the applause began, it started softly, then grew into a standing ovation. Becka stepped back from the podium, her gaze scanning the crowd, not searching, but acknowledging. And then, just for a moment, her eyes found his. It wasn't a cinematic stare or a deliberate pause, just a quiet exchange, recognition without burden. She smiled, small and knowing, and he felt something settle inside him. Not forgiveness exactly, but finality. As the applause thundered, Jaylen joined in, his hand steady. He wasn't clapping for himself, or even for her, but for everything the moment represented, the full circle between disgrace and dignity, fall and rise. When the event ended, people surged forward to greet her, to shake hands, to ask for photos. Jaylen stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the sound wash over him. Then he stood, slipped out through a side exit, and stepped into the late afternoon light. Outside, the city moved at its usual rhythm, indifferent and alive. Jaylen took a deep breath, realizing for the first time in years that there was nothing left to fix, no weight left to carry. Becka had her peace. He had his purpose. Dignity, he thought, didn't need revenge. It only needed a witness. And somewhere between the man he'd been and the man he'd become, he finally understood that he'd been both. Share this story if you've ever been talked down to, and let success do the talking. Comment, unshakable if you've learned that quiet strength always wins. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.